Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emily Rolfe and I am the Curator of Contemporary Visual Art at Campbelltown Art Centre. I'm speaking to you today from Darug land, and I would like to acknowledge Darug elders past, present and future, as well as pay respect to the Dharawal people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which Campbelltown Art Centre stands and where this exhibition takes place. Dharawal people's deepening connection to culture and customs have cared for this country for over 60,000 years. We acknowledge elders past, present and future for their immense spiritual connection to place that was never ceded. Dharawal land has always been recognised as a meeting place for people from other lands, and in this spirit, we respectfully continue this tradition through the bringing together of communities through arts and culture. Currently on exhibition at Campbelltown Art Centre, but unfortunately behind closed doors, is I'm a Heart Beating in the World, Diaspora Pavilion 2. This exhibition is a partnership between 4A Centre for Contemporary Asian Art, the International Curators Forum and Campbelltown Art Centre. It is curated by Adelaide Bannerman, Jessica Taylor and Mikala Tai. The exhibition considers the navigations, imaginings and lived experiences of 6 artists who belong to a diaspora. These artists are based in the UK, in the Caribbean and in Australia. Over the next 3 Wednesdays, we will be presenting a lunchtime artist talk with 3 artists from the exhibition. Today, we are joined by Abdul-Rahman Abdullah, who will be in conversation with exhibition co-curator Mikala Tai. These talks are interpreted by Sweeney Interpreting, and Jennifer McLaughlin will be joining us today. If for any reason you can't see Jennifer on your screen, or if you have any tech issues, please let us know via the Q&A feature. So Abdul-Rahman and Mikala will be in conversation for the next 20 minutes or so. If you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and they will try to answer them. We will navigate through the exhibition virtual tour as they speak, and I'll leave a link for you to explore this a bit further in your own time. I'll now hand you over to Abdul-Rahman and Mikala. Welcome.
Yeah, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Mikala Tai. I'm one of the co-curators as part of this show. And I am joining today from Gadigal land, and I would like also to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I feel in this time of what seems to be endless lockdown, it's even more important to acknowledge the land that is really giving us so much solace. And I find that my getting out of the house time, my 1 hour, is really important at this moment. So I give continuous thanks to those that have cared and have custodianship over this space. Abdul-Rahman and I had a talk like this probably about a year ago when we lamented the lockdown and thought we'd be doing all the rest of our talks in person, but it appears that COVID has other ideas. But we're happy that you can join us for this quick chat today. Just to briefly introduce the exhibition in case you haven't seen it. The Diaspora Pavilion is an ongoing exploratory program really about research and presentation led by international curators in London. And my co-curators Adelaide and Jess have been working in many iterations of this, and it is sort of well known for its 2017 Venice Biennale Pavilion, the Diaspora Pavilion, of which this is sort of part of the next continuation for the 2022 Venice Biennale. And what this whole project is supposed to be about is really interrogating the idea of diaspora, what it means to us now, what it means, the changing meaning of it, and how we all relate to this bigger conceptual idea of what diaspora is in a really personal and intimate way. So it's really great to have some 15 minutes of power chat, I think, with Abdul-Rahman to talk about what he thinks of this diaspora and how he's approached it in this project. It has been a very constant conversation that we've had since we first invited you to be part of the show. So I'd love for you to share that with our audience today.
I should introduce myself too. It's hi there everyone, it's Abdul-Rahman Abdullah and I'm calling in from Wajang country, just south of Boorloo, Perth, over in Western Australia, where we are not actually in lockdown at the moment over in Fortress WA, but I'm out here on the farm, so it doesn't make a lot of difference to me either way. Yeah, this project has been ongoing, it feels like. I've just done some acquittals for a grant I received, and looking back at the original sort of timelines and proposals, it was 2019, I think, when the conversation began, and everything has been stretched out, dragged out, and the context around us has shifted considerably since that initial wide-eyed, optimistic view of the world we have had in late 2019. But here we are, the conversations continue, and the ideas we were talking about become even more pressing, over that space of time. Did you want to just go? We want to go into some of the virtual tour, and I think we will actually focus on that one work for now, should we, Mikala?
Yeah, I think we really wanted to talk about one of the works that was commissioned for the show, Burak. Actually, it was the first commissioned work, was it not? Yes.
Yeah.
And when I first spoke to Abdul-Rahman about being involved in the exhibition, we had a really big chat about what does diaspora mean and what does it mean for Abdul-Rahman. Does he identify as part of a diaspora? And if he does, what did that mean, and what how can we think about the threads of through line, and how mythology and stories and oral histories have been really important to keeping diaspora conversations really live. And so this work really, for me, I feel like reflects those early conversations. So perhaps, Abdul-Rahman, if you want to talk us through the work and where it came from, why?
Yeah, I made two new quite large scale works for the project, and this was the first one. And it was a work that had been sitting around in my mind for quite a few years before I got this perfect curatorial opportunity to actually make the work. And the work, it's simply called Burak, and Burak is this figure from Islamic laws. There's a few ways you can conceptualize that, but it's quite an unexpected creature it's referenced in the Quran, but it's sort of fleshed out in the Hadiths, which are sort of these recorded sayings of the Prophet, which go concurrent with the Quran, but they're not considered sacred text in the same way. But Burak was this mythic creature who appears in a particular surah called the Night Journey. And it was a revelation in which the Prophet ﷺ traveled overnight from Mecca to Jerusalem, ascended to heaven, returned back to Mecca, and then returned back to Jerusalem and back to Mecca, all in one night, mounted on this winged horse creature, it's a bit of an unexpected story to come out from particularly a visually austere religion like Islam. And it's something which I've always been fascinated by. And one of the reasons for that too is this creature has appeared in many different iterations over the last, the story is from about 1,300 years ago, but over the last particularly, 900, 1,000 years, as the culture spread throughout the world, this figure has reappeared in different ways, often in, very commonly in Persian miniature art and Mughal art from South Asia and India, all the way down to the Philippines. There's, quite a fixation in different parts of the world on different aspects of the culture, and this has just been particularly prevalent in those areas. And so in this way, I wanted to create my own iteration of this very old figure and, introduce my interpretation of that figure into this lexicon, I guess, which kind of goes beyond the contemporary era back to 1,000 years or so. But Burak, the name itself, it's derived from the Arabic word for lightning, and it sort of references this idea of instantaneous movement. And for me, and talking to Mikala and looking at myself and my experiences in terms of diaspora, which was a sort of new way of looking at myself, which was absolutely relevant, I guess. It just took me a while to come to that. I was born in Australia, but my mum's a migrant, and the story of the creation stories of all migrants involve this idea of a journey. And not only the idea of a journey, often the idea of an impossible journey. And that, for me, is what this creature can represent. Go on, Mikala.
I think when we talked about diaspora, in every conversation we've had with artists and others who identified with this, the concept of the journey is really, really important, because fundamental to the idea of diaspora is that you have moved, or people have moved from an original home to a new home. And for yourself and me, this was a journey that our extended family took, our parents took, our grandparents took on our behalf, and we have been the beneficiaries of the risks and the difficulties that they overcame to move. And I think this figure becomes kind of hopeful in that there is like a protection around those kinds of journeys and the acknowledgement that those journeys exist. And I think it's become even more pertinent. I mean, this exhibition has been cooking for a long time, but these ideas are ongoing. And I think even now, you know, with what's happening in contemporary times, with, you know, the very immediate ideas of the journeys that are happening in Afghanistan at this very second, this becomes even more relevant. And it's really important, I think, for us to engage with artworks and allow a reflection onto what this really means in the wider circle. These objects are not just made in a vacuum and sit within white-walled galleries, but they really have a bigger comment on what is happening and what's really important. So this work has got an increasingly, I think, poignant feel right at this point in time. Not sure how you feel, ARA, now looking at it.
Yeah, well, I guess it's that idea, this idea of hope in an instantaneous journey, you know, something that is impossible, but sort of throughout human history, and now more so than ever, that pressing need and for hope to overcome an overwhelming or journey that needs to be undertaken has always been a part of the human experience. And it's just, and throughout doing this work and some of the other works, particularly with this project and looking at that idea of diaspora, became very, I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't aware, but became far more aware of where we are now, where we live, the context we live in. For many people around the world, does represent this idea of impossible hope. You know, it's an aspirational place of privilege, which does exist. Yet the sort of the bitter irony in that is, you know, I joke about Fortress WA, but Australia has set itself up as that fortress to deny access to the people who are in most need and most vulnerable, and quite often in that position directly as a result of our own interventions, you know. So, you know, you can't help but be aware of that sort of, you know, kind of hideous irony, and recognize your own privileges and where you sit in that. And I guess for me, making this particular work too, it's slightly different to how it's been traditionally portrayed. Most often the Burak is portrayed with a human face, with a woman's face. I chose to leave it as that animal. For one thing, I've never seen a photo of Burak, so I had no actual references to go back to. But I wanted to really create this sense of vulnerability, I guess, something of newness and vulnerability, and something almost very ordinary, an ordinary encounter with this very young animal, which represents something sort of vast and impossible, but something that we hope and need in many ways, I guess.
Yeah, I think the idea of hope is really important. And we think about all those journeys, it's pretty much fundamentally predicated on hope that there could be something else. So it's a really beautiful figure. But I also want to, just because, you know, we hardly ever get these chats with the artists and it's a slightly different tack, but could you talk a little bit about how you make something like this? Is this one piece of wood? How do you even do this? What happens?
Well, it's like all my works, they're laminated woods. Everything comes in beams. I think in this case, it's either 50 or 75 mil thick gelaton. So you end up laminating a big old block together. And I see it as going through the stages of Duplo, Lego, down to Technic. You know, it starts off very low resolution, you know, like 4 polygons or something. And then you just see the process of chainsaw first, my trusty cordless chainsaw, and then through chisels. Most of it's done in chisels. And it's a bit slower, but I always say I want to make my mistakes slower. A chainsaw, you can make that mistake pretty quick, and it's a lot harder to come back from. In this case, I actually did the work in 2 stages. I did the horse first and then the wings afterwards, and I actually did another work in between. It's just part of scheduling, and also this project got dragged out quite a lot. So then the wings are 2 separate objects, and that's also, you got to take into account freight. You got to take into account the journey that this work has got to undertake itself, and it's a big part of what I do is working on a farm in WA is how these sculptures get out. You know, it's a part of the problem solving. So the wings are 2 separate things, and they're just held on with threaded rod pins. So there's no fixings as such there. It's just held down with gravity on there. I should mention the rose petals in there in the image, because there's a bit of a genesis to that. Going back to the original story of the Burak and how it's depicted with the prophet as the passenger, and there's a lot of prohibitions about figurative work traditionally in Islamic cultures, but that doesn't mean that there was figurative work all over the world. It's just it's what humans do. Most often the line was drawn at depicting the prophet, and you weren't supposed to depict the prophet himself. So often there'll be a figure with a veiled face or a blank face. But I did find quite a lot of images where they would depict the Burak flying with this single white rose kind of just hovering above Burak. And it was a way of describing the indescribable, of it's almost a proxy for something that shouldn't be described visually. So I just love that idea where humans looking for coded ways of describing what can't be described. So I wanted to introduce those white rose petals, which have all sorts of other connotations, and other mythologies attached to that from all over the place. The idea of a white rose, nobody hates a white rose. So I wanted to create this sort of this space, almost this undisturbed space around the creature, just to give it that. Again, there's a certain vulnerability about these are rose petals just on the ground creating this carpet. It's like in autumn when you get the grounds covered in leaves or flowers, and they're so easily disturbed, and it's quite ephemeral and just doesn't last long. But it's such a beautiful effect. So I wanted to sort of treat the space with that, just describing the indescribable, like giving you the myth in some way. That's where the white roses come from.
No, it looks beautiful. I think it also looks weightless as well.
Yeah.
We've only got a few more minutes, I think, left. So maybe we can zoom over to the other work that we commissioned for this exhibition, which is Throne Room. And this work kind of directly is influenced by a journey that you made, kind of tracing family, generations, I guess, in the past. Yes. So also, amazingly, for those who have not seen this, it is also made out of wood. I think many people who even came to the show were not really aware that the so-called tiger pelt is actually all carved. So maybe you can have a little bit of a chat about the concepts quickly, this one?
Yeah, it'd have to be pretty quick, because the journeys and the histories that I was thinking about when I actually made this work go back some way. And it was all based on this research trip that I had done back to South Sulawesi as a way of connecting my family tree through Malaysia back to its origins in Sulawesi, which I managed to do. I managed to connect back, I think, about 18 generations back to the 12th century in this sort of unbroken lineage and on record. And for me, it was just a list of names, but to actually see a list of names which go from me back to this quite literally mythic documentation of the past, which is part of the South Sulawesi history, was a really special thing, particularly as in Australian person. My mother's a migrant, my dad's convict ancestry. That idea for a non-Indigenous Australian person of a history that goes back beyond a certain way, it just doesn't, it's not part of our worldview until you sort of encounter it and you see that. This work itself was a work about me researching another time. So often my works are about a particular time and place from another particular time and place. This one has got to step through a few of those things, going back to this history. But a big part of this work was me realizing my own limitations in researching that history and where my imagery was coming from, where my reference material was coming from, how I was exploring this past, mitigated through online sources, through a completely different language, through these completely colonized lens that I was very aware that I was viewing this history through. So there was sort of these layers, these quite problematic layers, which I just wanted to acknowledge in some way. Just to summarize a little bit, just the tiger skin itself, I wanted to create this idea of a throne room, which can be anywhere, which can be thrown down anywhere, it can be moved, it can be transported. Just the act of throwing out that tiger skin creates that aspirational space. It creates that throne room. there's all sorts of stuff I could talk about in this. I'm very aware that we've only got like, a little bit of time. Again, all carved in wood. They're 2 macaques. I've got a little bit of some grumpy commentary about this online about the tiger skin, but I do remind people that he's actually carved completely from wood. And I did use a reference tiger skin, which I loaned, but it was, I think, pre-1967, technically a legal skin. But yeah, having that in the studio next to me, the actual tiger skin. Man, I've worked from a lot of taxidermy references and things, but the large predator, you can see the attraction. It's this amazing object. He just like, you can see at any point in history, that skin was such a such an attractive object, and basically the journey undertaken to get that skin particularly was part of it. But it was very uncomfortable to have this large predator's face in my studio staring up at me from the floor that whole time. And it sort of makes you really aware of that animal as a center of a large territory, and you're a guest in it. And no matter where that is, it's the skin, it's not the animal, it's just, it's clothes. It retains that real strength of territorialness. I don't know how to say that word, but yeah. And so I wanted to try and bring that into this work in some way, and I'm hoping to achieve that a little bit.
No, definitely. I think because your carving is so realistic, you are open to such online slander about your work.
Yeah, it's happened a bit more.
I think Natasha's just posted a question up, and I think we're kind of unpacking this work. So you got the tiger, that's the sort of the main symbols, that idea of like the throne room, the place where people would collect or illustrate the trophies that they had collected. But they're also there with the monkeys, and the monkeys kind of are not associated with that kind of thing. So how are the monkeys engaged with this kind of mise en scène?
Well, this work was, unlike the way I would normally work, this was quite an intuitive approach to me, where I sort of, a few years ago, after taking this trip, I just had this image in my head of this tiger skin creating a space. But that space was always inhabited by living things, by monkeys. It was always a living space. So in my head, it always had noise. And then if you've been to, anywhere in these sorts of places in the Malay Peninsula or out in Indonesia, into the into the jungle and into the countryside, it is just, all sort of those environments are, but it is just so full of life. There's constant movement. There's activity. And when you encounter like monkeys, there is this particular, that they reflect us. They reflect us in this really othered kind of way. They reflect all the nuances of humanity, like unnecessary violence, jealousy, all these things. This it's a part of the part of monkey world, I guess. So introducing this idea of this, like, I guess, uncontrolled life, or this life which is beyond our dictation, into such a still space. I wanted to create that discomfort in it. Also, a lot of the work I have has eyes, because they're animals, they have eyes, and where those eyes point and the gaze of those animals has always been a big part of the work. And in this particular one, that's why part of it in formal terms is elevating that monkey. I wanted to introduce the boxes and this idea of freight and cargo and movement, but it was also a sort of formal element to bring the monkey up to eye level. So you're face to face with this thing. And if you've ever been face to face with a macaque without anything in between, like at a zoo, it's a really disconcerting thing, and you hold your wallet and your phone real close, because that's just that real discomfort that they bring into a space. It's like, yeah, they're such irreverent little monkeys.
I would agree with that, and I kind of like the play of the idea that humans have been able to dominate, or we think we can dominate other animals, but the reality is that the monkeys will always win. Doesn't matter what. We've got another question, I think, about what wood you use as well.
All of these ones are done in gelatong, which is a wood from Indonesia. Pretty much all my sculptures are done in that particular wood. I've only just started using another type of wood. I love gelatong. It's light. It does what it's told. Flame does not get in the way. Yes. Yeah, it really does what it's told. I love it.
That's good. And then we've got one more question here. There's been a bit of a discussion, I think, at Campbelltown TAFE about whether the tiger skin was real. So I'm happy that we've cleared that one up.
It's a real sculpture of a tiger skin.
But there is also a question, and we've also discussed this at length, is how you living on a farm in the country in WA has influenced how you have made work and how it has sort of the animals and that ability for you to live in that kind of live environment does influence your sculptural practice.
Well, I don't know if you guys can hear, but there is like probably about 50 cows out the front of where I'm sitting, only about, maybe 10 meters away, hoping that their moves aren't coming in here. To be honest, so much of my work is talks about this past and his childhood memories and things like this. And so it does take a little while for my, my current environment to seep into what I'm doing. But over the past, especially year or so, it absolutely has started sort of entering this visual language, this sort of code of visual languages that I like to use, bringing these animal archetypes in and sort of presenting them in these, looking for that, the magical moments in the mundane experience. And for me, I guess a lot of these animals now represent a sense of domesticity and like very familiar surrounds. So more recently, I've done a work about my pet goat, Trevor, and sort of carved him into wood. The next work I'm actually embarking on is a collaborative project with my wife, Anna Louise Richardson, who's also an artist. And I am making these 2 pet sheep, which roam around this farm. And so a bunch of the next few works are actually animals that live in quite close proximity to me. And it's a relatively new thing. I've only been here this is 5 years now. So, but they've really started entering what I want to do and how I want to talk about them and how I see these as a reflection of, my sense of domesticity. It's sort of expanded beyond the interior spaces to take on this farm environment, which is, to me, is really exciting. And a big part of that is I want to mythologize these ordinary animals for my own children now, because a big coinciding with that was having my own family. And I want to be able to talk about these animals in magical ways for my own children. I think we as parents, that's a part of our obligation and responsibility, is to keep that magic alive for our kids. So, combining that with the work I do, it seems to make sense. So expect a lot more farm animals coming out. There are no tiger skins on this farm or my books. But I'm not finished with monkeys.
We might hand it back to Emily and the Campbelltown team, but we'd like to just say a quick thank you. There's so many people that have joined and indulged us in talking about these works. Abdul-Rahman and I like to talk about these things, so it's just nice to have an audience to listen to us.
We could bang on for ages about this, but
Thanks so much, you two. That was wonderful. And thanks, Jennifer, also for joining us today. I've just posted the link to the tour in the chat, so please feel free to explore at your own leisure. And please join us next Wednesday, where Mikala will be chatting with artist Leyla Stevens. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day.